Well, Anne Fitz-Gerald is the director of the Balsillie School of International Affairs and a professor of international security at Wilfrid Laurier University. She joins me live now from Waterloo in Canada. Welcome. First of all, I just want to talk about the efforts that have been made to stop this from continuing, this military coup. So we've got ECOWAS threatening all kinds of economic sanctions, the cutting off of financial aid, stopping flights in and out of the country, closing borders. To what extent is that likely to be effective?
Well, there's usually an ordering that we see roll out during these types of situations, and this is not a new situation, especially for the African continent. I think this is probably the seventh coup in Central and Eastern Africa over the past few years, and this is a terribly geostrategically important region and country, a country that has shown relative stability in a very, very difficult neighborhood that has been impacted by jihadist movements like the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. Obviously, for the sake of protecting civilians and avoiding any violence from breaking out on the streets of the capital city anywhere across the country, it is in the interests of all parties to come into discussions and restore constitutional order and civilian democratic rule as soon as possible. There appears to be resistance to that in the country. There also appears to be quite a lot of support for the new military leadership, but we can't underestimate the extent to which shuttle diplomacy will be going on in the background in an effort to bring a peaceful resolution to this crisis.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just as you mentioned there, Anne, I mean, it seems like the military leaders are resistant to sitting down and discussing who's going to be in power. Indeed, we've had General Chiani making demands of his own, warning his opponents not to come in with any military force. Is that something you think is likely? Could we perhaps see ECOWAS or France using any kind of military effort?
I think the threat that force could be resorted to has already been mooted, and ECOWAS certainly has the capability to deploy a military force. They last deployed a military force in 2017 in the Gambia to facilitate the peaceful transition of the government there, and they still have a presence in the Gambia. I think all parties would wish to see external military intervention avoided, but that requires some talks to come together. And there's risks with talks as well, because it gives a military commander status and political status. So I think the real question is the extent to which we're going to see the people and the population continue this support for the current military leader. And let's not forget, this is not the highest military authority in the country. The chief of defense is the highest military authority in the country. And in some African countries, we still have, and this is usually the basis for a coup, we have different entities with different direct chains of command to the president and civilian defense ministers. In this case, the leader of the coup, General Chiani, had a direct line to the president. Allegedly, there were some personal disputes and fallouts between himself and the president. He appears to have a strong following at the moment, but that could change. So it really, this is a question of who the people will support and whether or not we will see violence roll out. And violence could also come with external divisions between the armed forces and the armed entities. So there is an interest in bringing peace talks to the table. ECOWAS has a big role. Nigeria has a big role. Chad has already played a role and is a major player, and the United States and France.
I suppose the ultimate question, and it comes off the back of several things you said there about why there are so many coups that occur in this region of Africa, the Sahel belt. It's called the Coup belt as well. I mean, you mentioned that there's public support for this particular coup, and indeed it came off the back of protests in the country. Is that why we see so much unrest in the region? Is it military leaders taking advantage of public dissatisfaction, or are there other elements at play?
I think there are a number of elements at play. You've said one, the military feeling dissatisfied in the level of security being provided to the people, and many vulnerabilities perhaps not being addressed in the most optimal way. We also see dissatisfaction towards weak governance, but often civilian heads of state lack total control over economic resources to give back to the people, and so don't always have the means to bring prosperity to the people, and dissatisfaction is seen in that. But these unconstitutional and undemocratic arrangements concerning the governance of the security sector also remains problematic. And like in Sudan and other countries, it often stems from separate armed entities with a great deal of power, like presidential guards, which have the monopoly on the use of violence, just like the army, having direct lines to the president, and therefore being able to wield an enormous amount of power over and above the legitimate head of the armed forces. And lastly, the army is a people's institution and not an institution that should be political or have institutional allegiances to any one political party. And so the view of the people will be the deciding factor to this, and the extent to which whatever party, external or internal, can bring about constitutional law and peace on the ground.
Anne, good to speak to you. Appreciate your analysis. My guest, Anne Fitz-Gerald, Director of the Balsillie School of International Affairs.